The weekend rush filled Madison's Market in Charlotte, North Carolina. Shoppers weaved through aisles, carts rolling over polished floors. At the self-checkout, a tense exchange disrupted the usual rhythm. Officer Ryan Garrett stood rigid, glaring at the young cashier behind the counter. His voice cut through the hum of the store. "This price isn't right. Fix it." The cashier hesitated. "Sir, I think the system updates automatically. I can check." Garrett exhaled sharply, tapping his fingers against the counter. "I don't need excuses. Just do your job." A few feet away, Samantha Carter, dressed in a crisp white blouse and jeans, watched. Her expression remained neutral, but her gaze was sharp, assessing. The store quieted. Shoppers exchanged uneasy glances. Garrett leaned closer, voice tightening. "You trying to scam me? I can have you fired." The cashier flinched as Garrett's hand slammed onto the counter, shaking the register. Samantha stepped forward. "A uniform should represent responsibility, not intimidation." Garrett turned, smirking. The air inside Madison's Market had shifted. The hum of checkout scanners and casual conversation had faded, replaced by something heavier, something unspoken. Officer Ryan Garrett stood tall at the self-checkout lane, his rigid posture exuding authority. His sharp eyes flicked downward, scanning Samantha Carter with an expression of pure condescension. She was calm, too calm, and that irritated him. His smirk barely concealed his disdain. "You think you can tell me how to do my job?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence that had fallen over the area. Samantha met his gaze without flinching. She didn't need to raise her voice, nor did she need to match his aggression. Her tone was measured, firm, but carried an undeniable weight. "I think a uniform should represent more than just power." Garrett chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Let me guess. Another know-it-all civilian who thinks they understand law enforcement better than the people actually doing the job." His words dripped with sarcasm. A few feet away, a woman holding a shopping basket discreetly lifted her phone, angling it toward the confrontation. Others began whispering, their gazes darting between Garrett and Samantha. The energy in the store had shifted. It was no longer just another customer dispute. Garrett took a step forward, closing the space between them. The movement was deliberate, a silent assertion of dominance. "Let me explain something to you," he said slowly, voice dropping an octave. "When you interfere with police matters, it never ends well." Samantha didn't move. Her feet remained planted, her shoulders squared. "That young man was doing his job," she said, nodding slightly toward the trembling cashier. "You're the only one escalating this." The boy swallowed hard, eyes darting between them. He looked ready to melt into the floor. Garrett exhaled harshly, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off irritation. "Escalating? Lady, I was having a conversation. If you want to see escalation, I'd be happy to show you what that actually looks like." A murmur swept through the gathering crowd. The shoppers were no longer just bystanders. They were witnesses. A few more phones were raised discreetly, red recording lights blinking. Samantha's voice remained even. "Cops aren't supposed to intimidate civilians for doing their jobs," Garrett scoffed. "And you would know that because—" His smirk widened, his arrogance unshaken. "I believe in accountability," she answered simply. The words landed with a quiet force, one that unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite place. For a second, just a second, his smirk faltered. Then it was back, sharper this time. His eyes darkened. "You're one of those people," he said, his voice lowering into something more insidious. "Always looking for a reason to call out a cop, always so eager to criticize but never actually willing to step up and do the damn job." The way he said "those people" was intentional. The underlying message was clear. Samantha didn't bite. Her expression didn't shift. "You're mistaken," she replied, her voice calm but edged with something undeniable: control. Garrett, however, was no longer interested in a debate. He was interested in winning. He let out a mocking chuckle, shaking his head. "You know what? I don't have time for this. I suggest you mind your business before you find yourself in trouble." A flicker of something passed through the crowd. Discomfort, unease. Samantha didn't move. Garrett stepped closer still, deliberately invading her space. The movement was aggressive, a power play. But she didn't back down. For the first time, his confidence wavered. Not much, just a fraction of hesitation. He was used to people flinching, stepping aside, avoiding confrontation. She did none of those things. "Did you hear me?" His voice was quieter now, more controlled, but no less dangerous. "You need to walk away." The store was silent. No beeping registers, no idle chatter. Just the low, simmering tension between them. Samantha's response was steady, unmoved. "No," Garrett blinked. He hadn't expected that. A ripple of hushed voices moved through the growing crowd. More phones were up now, capturing every second. The muscles in Garrett's jaw ticked. His fingers twitched. "You want to make this difficult?" "You're the only one doing that," she countered. His smirk returned, but now it was forced. "You people always think you're so damn righteous." There it was, the line that drew an audible reaction from those watching. A low murmur of disapproval swept through the onlookers. Garrett, realizing his misstep, clenched his jaw. His eyes flickered briefly to the recording phones. And then, he made a decision. Without warning, he stepped forward again, chest nearly touching hers, shoulders squared like a wall. It was a move designed to intimidate, to force her back without actually laying a hand on her. Samantha remained rooted in place. For the first time, Ryan Garrett felt like he wasn't in control. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. "I strongly suggest you step away," he ground out. Samantha held his gaze, unshaken. "Or what?" He didn't answer. Not verbally. Instead, his hand dropped to his belt. There was a shift in the air, a collective inhale from the bystanders, a flicker of recognition. This was no longer just an argument. Samantha saw it happen before it even did. The way his fingers hovered just above his holster. The moment his weight shifted slightly to the right. And then Ryan Garrett reached for his gun. Gasps erupted. Someone let out a sharp, panicked whisper. "He's pulling a weapon." Samantha's eyes didn't leave his. But now, his arrogance was gone. There was something else, flickering beneath his hardened exterior. Doubt. She spoke, her voice measured, but carrying the weight of something undeniable. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Garrett's fingers froze on the grip of his weapon. Silence engulfed the supermarket. Shoppers stood frozen, holding their breath. And in that single, suspended moment, Samantha Carter took full control. The supermarket felt different now. The background noise of carts rolling and casual chatter had faded. A heavy tension thickened the air, pressing in on everyone standing within the self-checkout area. All eyes were on Ryan Garrett and Samantha Carter. The officer's smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of growing frustration. Samantha, however, remained exactly as she had been, calm, unwavering, her stance rooted like stone. Garrett's fingers twitched at his belt. The irritation in his eyes darkened into something deeper. Authority was slipping from his grasp, and he knew it. "Step aside," he ordered, voice sharper now. "Last warning." Samantha met his glare, her expression unreadable. "You're making this about power," she said. "But it's about responsibility." A muscle in Garrett's jaw flexed. His patience, already stretched thin, snapped. "That's it," he barked, voice rising above the store's hush. "You're interfering with police business. I could arrest you right now." The words rang through the air, hitting hard. A few gasps rippled through the growing audience. The weight of a police officer's threat wasn't lost on anyone. The cashier stepped back, as if afraid of being too close to the scene. A woman holding a grocery basket gripped the handle tighter. Several customers shifted, their instincts telling them to avoid trouble. But not Samantha. She didn't move. Her voice remained steady, but her words carried an edge of quiet defiance. "Do you really believe you have that right?" Garrett's lip curled. How dare she question him? His hand snapped up, pointing at her, commanding, demanding. "I don't need a damn lecture from you." His voice boomed, loud enough to make a child in the nearby cart flinch. A murmur spread through the crowd. A man near the bakery section spoke up, voice firm but wary. "She hasn't done anything wrong." Garrett turned his head sharply. "You want to get involved in this too?" The man shrank back, shaking his head. Samantha, however, remained unshaken. "What exactly do you plan to charge me with, officer?" The way she said it made something tighten in Garrett's chest. He didn't like that tone, the kind that made it sound like she knew something he didn't. He squared his shoulders, puffing up his chest. "Interfering with an officer," he snapped. "Obstruction of justice. You want more?" Samantha didn't answer. She didn't have to. The hush in the supermarket grew deeper. More people had stopped shopping. More phones had been raised, recording. Garrett noticed. His pulse ticked faster. The weight of the lenses, the unseen judgment of a growing digital audience, pressed down on him. His name, his career, his reputation. All of it could be tarnished if these people didn't see him in control. He needed to act. Now, with a quick motion, he reached for his cuffs. "Turn around," he barked. "You're under arrest." The moment shattered into pure disbelief. A woman near the produce aisle let out a startled gasp. "For what?" A man near the frozen foods shook his head. "You can't just—" The growing crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were reacting. Samantha, still unmoving, watched Garrett's quick, angry movements with quiet precision. She didn't resist. She didn't flinch. But she didn't comply either. Garrett stepped closer, fury thickening his presence. "I said turn around!" Still, she didn't move. The moment stretched, unbroken. And then, Garrett made his biggest mistake. In a single, impulsive motion, he reached forward. His fingers clamped around her wrist, intent on spinning her around, forcing compliance, showing the crowd he was still in control. The contact lasted less than a second, because the moment his hand closed around her wrist, Samantha turned her gaze on him fully, and something in her eyes froze him in place. It wasn't fear. It wasn't submission. It was authority. Real authority. The kind that made a man instinctively hesitate without knowing why. Garrett's grip weakened, confusion flickering across his face for a fraction of a second. And then, Samantha pulled back, not aggressively, not forcefully, but in a way that was deliberate, controlled. Garrett blinked, as if thrown off balance. As if somehow, the tables had turned without him realizing it. The crowd was watching, waiting. And that's when it happened. The moment where frustration tipped into recklessness. Garrett's face burned. His pride, his authority, his very position felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He reacted. Too fast, too angry. And before his mind could catch up to his instincts, his hand moved. Down, to his holster, to his weapon. The supermarket became still. A moment suspended in time. And then, Ryan Garrett drew his gun. Gasps tore through the store. A woman let out a sharp, panicked cry. Shoppers flinched, backing away. A man near the deli section raised his hands instinctively, as if he himself had become a target. A mother pulled her child closer, shielding her with trembling arms. And there, in the center of it all, stood Samantha Carter, unmoving, unshaken, staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. Garrett's breath came fast, his hand tight around the weapon's grip. His eyes burned with anger, but beneath that rage, something else flickered, something unspoken, something dangerously close to panic. Samantha exhaled slowly. She never once looked at the gun. Her eyes never left his. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady, absolute, unyielding. "Now," she said, "you really screwed up." The gun didn't waver. Its barrel, black and unforgiving, pointed straight at Samantha's chest. The supermarket was silent. No more whispers. No more background noise. Just the sound of shallow, panicked breathing. Ryan Garrett stood firm, his grip on the gun tight, knuckles white. His stance was wide, a trained posture, yet something about it felt off balance, shaky. His anger still boiled beneath the surface, but now something else swirled within him. Doubt. Samantha Carter did not move. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. If there was fear, she didn't show it. Her calmness only made Garrett angrier. "I said put your hands up." His voice cracked slightly, betraying him. Samantha remained still. Her gaze didn't flicker to the gun, didn't acknowledge the threat. Instead, she held his eyes, level, assessing, waiting. "I don't think you want to do this," she said, her voice even. The muscles in Garrett's jaw clenched. "You think I won't?" His words came out fast, desperate. "You think I won't take you in? You're obstructing justice. I could throw you in a cell right now." Still, Samantha didn't react. Instead, she reached into her pocket. A ripple of tension shot through the room. Garrett's finger twitched over the trigger. "Don't move!" More gasps from the crowd. A woman near the dairy aisle let out a muffled cry. But Samantha didn't stop. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out her phone. Garrett's shoulders stiffened. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Samantha's thumb hovered over the screen. Then she dialed. A slow, controlled movement. Her eyes never left his. Garrett let out a bark of laughter, though it lacked confidence. "Who the hell are you calling? 911?" His lips curled. "Lady, I am the law here." He took another step forward, the gun still raised. "No one's coming to help you." Samantha brought the phone to her ear. The crowd held its breath. Then she spoke. "This is Colonel Samantha Carter. I need immediate military police backup at Madison's Market, Charlotte. An officer is armed and threatening civilians." The name, the rank, landed like a bomb. Garrett's expression didn't change at first. But something in his eyes shifted. It was a fraction of a second. A flicker of recognition. Then, his fingers tightened around the grip of his gun. Samantha lowered the phone slightly, watching him. She saw it. The moment he realized he had made a mistake, but his pride wouldn't let him admit it. He doubled down. "You're bluffing." His voice was quieter now, but there was an edge of uncertainty. Samantha's lips barely moved. "I don't bluff." A slow, cold chill crept up Garrett's spine. The crowd, previously frozen in fear, began to murmur. More phones lifted, cameras rolling. The tension shifted. No longer was Samantha the one in a dangerous position. Garrett was. His gun was still raised. His name, his badge. His entire career now rested on what he did next. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, he forced a laugh. A hollow sound, desperate. "This is ridiculous," he spat. "Even if you are military, this is my jurisdiction. You're on civilian grounds." Samantha tilted her head slightly. Her expression remained unreadable. "You sure about that?" Garrett's nostrils flared. "Damn right I am." Samantha lifted her phone again. "Then why is the Department of Defense on the line?" Garrett's face drained of color. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The entire supermarket had gone silent again. A woman near the entrance whispered to someone, "She's military." A man near the frozen section took a cautious step back. The pressure was crushing now. The walls were closing in on Garrett, and he knew it. Samantha finally broke eye contact and looked down at the phone screen. She pressed speaker. A voice boomed from the receiver. This is Major James Conway, Military Police Division. Who am I speaking to? Samantha responded without hesitation. Colonel Carter, U.S. Army. I'm standing in front of a Charlotte PD officer who has drawn his weapon on an unarmed civilian. I need immediate intervention. A heavy pause. Then, understood, Colonel. Response team en route. Stand by. Click. Samantha set her phone down on the counter. She folded her arms. And then, for the first time, she let her expression shift. It was slight. The smallest trace of something behind her eyes. Not anger. Not fear. Authority. Ryan Garrett felt it like a slap to the face. His body locked up, his mind racing through 100 possible exits. But there were none. The moment he pulled that gun, he had signed his own fate. Samantha stepped closer, her voice dropping just enough for only him to hear. You just threatened a ranking U.S. military officer on camera, she said smoothly. Now tell me, officer, who's really in charge here? Garrett couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He had nothing, nowhere to go. The walls had officially closed in, and Samantha Carter had just taken full control. The silence inside Madison's Market was absolute. The weight of the moment pressed down on every single person in that supermarket. Eyes locked onto Ryan Garrett, the officer whose authority had unraveled in mere minutes. His gun, still aimed at Samantha Carter, felt heavier than ever in his grip. But then, the front doors burst open. A gust of air swept through as uniformed military police officers flooded inside, their presence commanding and undeniable. Their dark uniforms stood in stark contrast to the bright lights of the supermarket, their expressions unreadable, disciplined. At the center of them was Colonel Marcus Lewis. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence filled the space with an authority that demanded immediate respect. Without hesitation, he walked straight toward Samantha. The tension snapped like a rubber band stretched too tight. Garrett's breath hitched. The moment Colonel Lewis stopped in front of Samantha, he did something that made Garrett's stomach plummet. He inclined his head slightly, a nod of deference. Colonel Carter, he said, his voice crisp, respectful. We received your call. Are you all right? Colonel. The words sank into Garrett's chest like a stone. The gun in his hand, his lifeline, his crutch, his final claim to authority, slipped from his grasp. It hit the tile floor with a metallic clatter that seemed to echo through the silent store. His face drained of color. Every ounce of confidence, every smirk, every drop of arrogance that had once lined his features vanished. Samantha, still composed, didn't move, didn't react to his spiraling. Instead, she reached into her pocket. With a slow, deliberate motion, she withdrew her military ID. She held it up, not just for Garrett to see, but for everyone. Samantha Carter, she stated evenly, Colonel, United States Army. The weight of her title landed like a gavel, slamming in a courtroom. The cashier, the customers, the staff, everyone watching let out a collective murmur. Some whispered in disbelief. Others stared at Garrett, waiting, watching his reaction. Garrett, however, looked frozen. Oh my God, she's military, someone in the crowd whispered. Another voice, this one more direct. He just pulled a gun on a high-ranking officer. The realization rippled outward, fueled by the dozens of phones still recording. Garrett took a step back, the world closing in on him. But Samantha wasn't done. Her eyes locked onto his, and this time there was no patience left. Officer Garrett, she said, voice like steel wrapped in ice. You've just made the worst mistake of your career. Garrett's mouth opened, but no words came out. The weight of the crowd's judgment, the lens of every recording phone, the authority of the military police standing before him, it was suffocating. Colonel Lewis took one step forward, his deep voice slicing through the silence. Samantha, would you like to press charges? A loaded question. Another gasp from the crowd. The shift manager near the back grabbed the edge of a counter for support. The cashier stared wide-eyed at Samantha, waiting. Garrett snapped out of his stupor. His hands lifted slightly, almost like a surrender. "Hold on." "You don't talk now," Lewis cut in. His gaze was cold, assessing. Garrett's face burned. "This is insane! She was interfering with my duty!" Samantha let out a quiet exhale, almost a sigh. "Your duty?" Her voice was sharper now, slicing through his defense like a scalpel. "Your duty is to serve and protect, Officer Garrett. Instead, you used intimidation, threats, and excessive force on an unarmed civilian." She let the words hang there. The crowd murmured louder. The phones kept rolling. Garrett's pulse pounded. He could feel his own panic building. Colonel Lewis looked to his men. "Cuff him!" That was it. Two uniformed officers stepped forward, firm hands grabbing Garrett's wrists. "No," Garrett stammered, jerking back instinctively. "You can't. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't—" The first cold steel cuff snapped around his wrist. The crowd exploded. A mixture of gasps, hushed whispers, even applause. Garrett's face flushed deep red. His arms were yanked behind his back, the other cuff locking into place. And just like that, the power he had once wielded so freely was gone. The rank, the badge, the weapon, none of it could save him now. As the officers tightened their grip on him, a man near the bakery section called out, voice full of grim satisfaction. "Not so tough now, are you?" Garrett snapped his head up, his teeth clenched. "Shut the hell up!" But his outburst only fueled the fire. A woman near the produce section shook her head in disgust. "He could have killed her," more voices joined in. "This is what happens when you think a badge makes you untouchable." "He thought he could pull a gun on anyone and walk away." "Guess again." Garrett struggled against the officers as they started leading him away. His face twisted with frustration, but his voice was weaker now, desperation creeping in. "I can explain. This isn't what it looks like." Colonel Lewis watched, expression unreadable. Samantha, however, said nothing. She simply watched as the man who had tried to control the moment was now being dragged out of the store in cuffs. Then the sound came. The familiar ping of a notification. Then another. And another. The phones in the crowd lit up as social media notifications flooded in. Someone had already uploaded the video, and it was spreading like wildfire. Garrett glanced up, saw a woman near the entrance, showing the footage to someone. His stomach dropped. The footage of him pulling a gun on an unarmed woman. The footage of his downfall. A slow, unbearable realization crawled over his skin. This wasn't just happening inside the store anymore. This was happening everywhere. Samantha finally turned, meeting his panicked eyes one last time. "You were right about one thing," she said. "Someone is getting arrested today." Garrett's breath caught. And then they took him away. Power doesn't come from a badge. It comes from integrity. What do you think? Should Officer Garrett face criminal charges? Comment below. The sun hung low over Madison's Market, casting long golden rays through the glass doors as Samantha Carter stepped outside. The crisp autumn air carried the distant hum of the city, but behind her, the echoes of what had just transpired still lingered. Her military insignia glinted subtly in the fading light, a silent reminder of who she was. Not just a woman, not just a bystander, but a force that could not be silenced. Inside, customers still whispered, re-watching the video that had already begun its viral ascent. The weight of justice hung over them, not in the form of vengeance, but in the realization that power unchecked would always meet its reckoning. She exhaled slowly, rolling her shoulders back, grounding herself in the moment. A voice, one she hadn't expected, broke her thoughts. The young cashier stood just beyond the sliding doors, his eyes filled with something between awe and gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. Samantha turned to him. studying the sincerity in his face. She gave a small nod. Justice doesn't just come from the law. It comes from those willing to stand up for what's right. Then, without another word, she walked away. What do you think? Did Officer Garrett get what he deserved? Share your thoughts below.